He paused by the PX window as the flag rope clinked and the mess hall queue breathed coffee steam, feathering the cold. A farmer scoffed at the guards feeding the enemy, and the inspection roomer pressed in like paperwork heavier than winter from town gossip and the colonel's clipboard. Whitaker didn't answer. He lifted a canteen cup to the light, then slid a V-mail letter across the Red Cross desk where rules sounded kinder than threats. Quiet men leave echoes too. Let me take you back. Mercy kept the gates. Steam drifted over the rails as the morning train sighed to a halt in northern Iowa. Cornfields breathed in long green rows. The barber shop 2 blocks down droned like a beehive, and the PX window threw a thin blaze of light across the yard. German prisoners stepped down one by one, boots scuffing the cinders, eyes narrowing at the wire. American guards waited with the stillness of fence posts, caps squared, hands easy. Somewhere behind them a wooden crate gave a small bright clink. Chief Warden Earl Whitaker laid his palm on that crate as if checking a heartbeat. Condensation slicked the boards, seeping from green glass inside. He looked toward the new arrivals, then toward the PX. His voice was radio-warm steady. "Welcome to Camp Alona," he said. "You will work. You will eat. You will be treated as men." One prisoner, narrow-shouldered, sunburned, glanced from Whitaker's hand to the crate. Another stared at the chapel roofline beyond the mess hall. Cloud shadows drifted over the yard like a fog of old orders, softening angles that had arrived hard from the sea. A farmer in sweat-dark denim stepped to the fence. Feeding the enemy now, he muttered to no one and everyone. Feeding the harvest, a guard replied without turning. "They help. We finish." From the PX door, Supply Sergeant Morrison shouldered through with a clipboard. A single Coca-Cola bottle forgotten on the sill caught the sun like a small emerald flare. The farmer saw it. "So that's how it is," he said. "Candy for captives." "It's inventory, not a parade," Morrison said. "PX stock, same as soap and stamps. Soap, I understand." "That there." The farmer tapped the wire with a knuckle. "That's sweetening the war." Whitaker didn't move. His hand stayed on the crate. "What sweetens a war," he said, "is ending it without teaching men to love cruelty." The German line wavered. A young prisoner, Klaus Weber, though no one here knew his name, tilted his head toward the PX window. He mouthed the label's curves in English he barely owned. Coca-Cola. The word was potion and rumor. He blinked as if the bottle were a signal, not a drink. "Script coupons don't cover Sundays." Morrison added more to Whitaker than the farmer. "Good," Whitaker said. "Sundays ought to cover us." A breeze rattled the chapel flag. The barber's buzz rose and fell a Midwestern metronome. Somewhere a typewriter kept its own rhythm. Camp Alona's radar, Whitaker liked to call the ledger sweeping for trouble before it formed. He watched the prisoners count steps from railcar to yard, to the pen to the shade. He watched their shoulders settle a notch as the sun lifted. The yard had a way of trimming noise down to things a man could hold: a tin cup, a stamped card, a line to stand in. The farmer wasn't done. "You treat them soft, they'll think you're soft." "We'll treat them firm," Whitaker said, "and decent." He lifted his hand from the crate. "Decent tends to stick." A guard at the gate cleared his throat. "Sir, the PX sill." "That bottle, I see it," Whitaker said. He walked over, wiped the glass with a folded towel, and set the bottle back inside the shadow of the window. For a moment the label glowed, then dimmed. "Put the inventory where it belongs," he told Morrison, "and keep the window clean." "Yes, sir." Weber watched Whitaker's sleeve, watched the small care of it. He tried a word he'd learned on the crossing. "Danke," he said, not to the bottle, not to the guard, but to the fact that the hand had not shaken. From the fence line, the farmer blew out a breath. Feeding the enemy, he repeated softer now, like a habit he wasn't sure he still needed. "Feeding the harvest," Morrison said again, closing the PX door with a gentle click. The train hissed once more, a tired animal. The crate on the platform cooled in the shade. Whitaker looked down at the wet print his palm had left, and then out across the Iowa yard, where the wire made tidy squares of sunlight, and the day, for all its rules, seemed to allow one small, unannounced kindness. Mercy had snuck into the order of things. Sunday heat swelled over Camp Alona, blurring the fence line. Inside the PX, the air smelled of dust wax and faint syrup. Sergeant Morrison leaned against the counter, holding a clipboard as if it might shield him from his own idea. "Sir," he said, lowering his voice when Whitaker stepped in. "What if we gave them a bottle each weekend? Just one Coca-Cola. Keep the peace. Maybe lift morale." Whitaker studied the crate behind him, beads of condensation already forming. "You want to hand soda to prisoners while farmers ration sugar." Chaplain Marlowe joined them from the mess hall doorway, wiping his hands. "We hand them hymns and Bibles. Mercy doesn't ruin a man, Earl." Morrison shifted. "Not mercy. Management. They talk about America as a place of fairness. Show them what fairness looks like." Across the yard, spoons clattered in tin trays. A breeze carried the smell of boiled coffee. Through the PX window, Whitaker could see the POWs lined up for lunch heads, bent under straw hats, sun flashing on canteen cups. "That's the trouble," Whitaker said. "They start believing we're a picnic, not a camp." Marlowe smiled slightly. "Faith has to start somewhere." "Faith doesn't keep inventory," Morrison said. "Sir, the stock's been sitting since April. Melts the labels clean off." He tapped the crate. "You could call it a Sunday service if that helps." Whitaker folded his arms. "Mercy is a luxury we can't afford." Marlowe's reply was quiet but sharp. "Then why build a chapel?" The words hung there long enough for the typewriter in administration to start its soft ticking, the camp's invisible radar sweeping for trouble. Outside, one of the Germans pushed a wheelbarrow past the PX. His sleeve brushed the open window. A bottle rolled forward, glinting green. Morrison caught it before it fell, and without thinking, held it out through the gap. The prisoner froze. Sunlight struck the label so hard it seemed to burn. Whitaker started to speak, stopped. The man on the other side hesitated, then accepted the bottle with both hands like a relic. Marlowe murmured, "It begins." "Nothing's begun," Whitaker said, but his tone had lost its edges. The guard tower bell rang twice a signal for lunch changeover, and the clatter from the mess hall rose like a wave. Sir Morrison said, breaking the silence, "We could make it a routine. Sundays only. Supervised. One per man. They'd see we still hold the rules." Whitaker rubbed the bridge of his nose. "And when Des Moines sends auditors, you'll explain our generosity. I'll explain our efficiency," Morrison said. "Happy workers mend faster." Marlowe chuckled. "Even Paul wrote about feeding enemies." "Paul wasn't reporting to Washington," Whitaker answered, but the sting was gone. Outside, the prisoner who'd caught the bottle lifted it toward the sun, reading each letter like scripture. Tiny bubbles drifted through the glass, slow and silver. He smiled uncertain, then set the bottle on a fence post, light glowing through the curve of the label. Whitaker watched him for a long moment. The hum of cicadas thickened, then broke with the sharp slam of a screen door. Morrison checked his clipboard. "Word is there's an inspection coming, sir. Maybe this Sunday." Whitaker's eyes narrowed. "Inspection rumor only?" Morrison said. "Heat like this, rumors grow faster than corn." Whitaker looked once more at the gleaming bottle, half shadow, half sun. "Then we'd better be sure what story we're telling," he said. Across the yard, the German reached for the bottle again, and the label flared so bright it seemed to warn them all. The rumor of inspection rose with the heat. Sunday came in on a hush of blue sky and cicadas. The yard at Camp Alona stood tidy as a hymn book. Lines were chalked on the dust distances, measured by habit, not threat. From town, the barbershop's buzz drifted in a lazy ribbon and met a faint jazz tune from a radio propped in the PX window clarinet, climbing, then settling. Whitaker stepped to the platform with his cap under one arm. Sergeant Morrison stood beside a stack of wooden crates packed with green glass. A corporal tallied head counts against a ledger. The Red Cross desk had been moved near the gate where a clerk with a rubber stamp waited calm as a courthouse clock. "Orders are simple," Whitaker said. 2 lines. Walk, not run. Take 1, not 2. Return the bottle when finished. He looked down the rows of German faces. "You will be treated as men. Answer like men." A murmur went through the line. Klaus Weber felt it in his ribs. He had learned to keep his eyes level, but today the sunlight insisted. The bottle in Morrison's hand winked like a little harbor light. Morrison nodded to the first man. "One for you." The prisoner took the bottle with both hands, surprise and caution sharing his mouth. He stepped aside, studying the label as if it might rearrange itself into sense. The line moved. Glass clicked glass. Breath slowed. "Sir," the corporal said, "we're holding a steady pace. "Keep it steady," Whitaker said. The Red Cross clerk lifted a parcel card, pressed the stamp, and set it down with a firm, soft thud. Then another. Then another. The sound ran under the clink of glass like a second metronome. Weber found himself counting stamp, clink, breath. Stamp, clink, breath. Fear that usually rode his shoulders slid back a notch. At the table, Chaplain Marlowe leaned toward Whitaker. "Discipline through decency," he said. "It has a shape. Let's make sure it keeps that shape." Whitaker answered. Weber reached the front. Morrison's hand hovered, then delivered the weight to his palm. Cool. He lifted the bottle toward the sun. Letters curled like ribbon. He spoke them quietly. Coca-Cola. The word felt borrowed and somehow returned. From behind the fence a pair of local boys stared their father, Farmer Harold Jensen, folding his arms. "That's a lot of sugar for a Sunday," Jensen said. "It's a lot of order for a Sunday," Whitaker said back, not unkindly. "Order's cheaper with a switch," Jensen muttered. Marlowe looked over. "Switches keep bodies quiet. Order keeps souls quiet." Jensen grunted, not convinced but not leaving. The radio let a saxophone slide into the morning. Weber tasted the cold. It fizzed against his mouth like laughter he'd forgotten. Along the line, posture changed by inches. Nobody ran. Nobody bargained. The bottles went out, and the bottles came back set in crates with the careful sound of a promise kept. Sir Morrison said after a while, chin toward the clerk, "They're lining themselves." Whitaker watched the curve of the queue straighten without command. "Men who are trusted begin to practice being trustworthy," he said. "Make a note." Weber slipped to the shade of a post and took out the little notebook he'd been hiding since Tunisia. His pencil shook once, then stilled. Today they gave us the American drink. It did not come as a trick or a trade. It came with rules and with respect. The sound of their stamp is different from the sound of our boots. One sound tells you what you are. The other asks you to decide. "Writing, are you a voice?" said. Weber looked up. The farmer stood outside the fence palm, resting near the wire. His face was weathered as field boards. "I write to remember," Weber said. "Write this," Jensen said, and lifted a paper sack over the post, careful of the wire. "Tomatoes. You'll hand me the bottle back when you're done." Weber hesitated, then nodded. "I will." Jensen glanced at Whitaker as if to say, "I'm not soft." Then to Weber, "Eat in the shade. Don't make a show of it." They sat on opposite sides of the fence, a furrow of air between them. Weber bit into a tomato and closed his eyes. Juice ran down his wrist. He laughed once, startled. "What's funny?" Jensen asked. "My daughter," Weber said. "She will not believe this taste when I tell her." "Tell her the season is good," Jensen said. "Tell her men are trying to be decent." Across the yard, the Red Cross clerk kept stamping steady and sure. Marlowe stood where he couldn't be seen as a judge, only heard as a man. "Remember to return your bottles," he called. "And remember, this order is not the enemy of kindness." A guard at the gate leaned toward Morrison. "Sergeant, listen." He tilted his ear to the wind. Beyond the barber shop buzz, beyond the radio's soft brass. Another sound rode the distance. A truck from a neighboring camp, gears downshifting on the lane. "Looks like visitors," Morrison said. The truck rolled to a stop, dust haloing its fenders. 2 MPs hopped out. The senior one tipped his hat. "Which one of you is the coke warden?" he asked, not quite smiling. Morrison glanced at Whitaker. Whitaker did not answer yet. The clerk pressed another stamp. The queue breathed. The bottle in Weber's hand cooled his pulse. The wind shifted and the question hung there bright as the glass in his palm. The typewriter in administration started the morning with its faithful clack, each letter striking like a small gavel. Chapel bells from across the road thudded through the walls, muffled by corn heat and distance. Colonel Hitch arrived at 9 sharp, hat brim like a ruler clipboard tucked tight. He didn't shake hands. He measured. "Colonel Hitch," he said, as if introducing a principal, not a person. "We'll begin with your records." Whitaker nodded and led him past the window that faced the yard. The Sunday crates were gone. Only clean wood squares remained on the platform. Inside the office, an empty Coca-Cola bottle stood on the desk, scoured and clear. Sunlight laid a bar of white through it, breaking into slow river shapes on the blotter. The colonel frowned at the bottle. "Evidence exhibit," Whitaker said. It behaves under light the way the yard behaves under attention. Hitch set the clipboard down and flipped to a form. A warden's job is custody, not metaphor. Since when is discipline measured in sugar water? Since it was measured in men, Whitaker said. Voice even. The typewriter stopped. The room accepted the pause. Its clock ticked once, then didn't. Eyes did instead, Hitch's sharp ones, Morrison's careful ones from the doorway. Chaplain Marlowe's gentle pair seated near the files. Protocol tightened like a collar. Hitch drew a pencil. My remit is to examine any deviation from standard practice. Reports indicate that guards acting under your authority brought Coca-Cola to prisoners on Sundays. They did? Whitaker said. They brought it the way we bring structure with rules and returnables. Good intentions do not equal good governance, Hitch said, and tapped the glass. Softness travels faster than rules. Morrison shifted. Sir, you'll speak when addressed, Hitch said. Not cruel, just exact. He turned pages. Incidents prior to the ritual. Whitaker slid a folder across the desk. Before Sundays, 7 minor conflicts in June. 2 refusals to work. 1 scuffle over ration bread. After Sundays began 2-line corrections. No fights, no refusals. Sick call complaints dropped by 1/3. Production tallies. He tapped a second sheet. Bean harvest up 12% on contracted details. Same guards, same hours. Fewer stumbles. Hitch read without moving his lips. The chapel bell thudded again. He did not look up. You attribute these changes to a carbonated beverage. I attribute them to the form the gesture took, Whitaker said. We asked men to live by a rule they could taste as order, not as favor. When you hand a bottle with conditions walk, don't run. 1, not 2. Return when finished. You are teaching rhythm. Rhythm, Hitch said, pencil notching the word as if it were a splinter. Marlowe leaned forward slightly. Discipline is a kind of music, Colonel. Hitch's glance cut to the chaplain and back. This is a camp, not a choir. Both are collections of people who can ruin a day if they sing out of turn, Whitaker said. The colonel set the pencil down with care. You understand the optics. Families with sons overseas read about enemy comforts and begin to doubt the weight of our side. We don't advertise. Whitaker answered. We don't decorate it. We exchange it for behavior that keeps guards and prisoners unhurt. Hitch walked to the window. Outside the yard lay in its squared sunlight. A line formed at the Red Cross desk parcel cards, waiting for the stamp that sounded like a promise. A guard adjusted a hatband and said nothing. A prisoner fixed a gate hinge and said nothing back. The wind lifted the flag at the chapel and let it go. You have created a ritual, Hitch said, without turning. We have created a grammar, Whitaker said, and from the desk lifted the empty bottle into the light. The room filled with a soft red glow label, ghosting the sunlight onto the blotter. You can see through it when it's empty. You can see men better when you don't fog them with contempt. Morrison risked a breath. Sir, men line themselves on Sundays now. No shouting. Bottles come back to the crate like they were born with manners. Hitch returned to the desk. He placed 2 fingers on the blotter where the light pooled. You are confident this is not bribery. It's custody, Whitaker said. Just a steadier kind, Data, Hitch said. Not metaphors. Data persuades. Whitaker slid the ledger forward again. 17 days. Head counts and fractions. Work outputs. Sick call entries. Chaplain notes. If mercy were leaking discipline, you'd see it here, Hitch read. The typewriter did not start again. Neither did the clock. Outside, a truck ground its gears as it left the lane. In the silence, the colonel's face softened half a fraction, then closed. You will suspend the ritual for 1 Sunday, he said. If your data holds, we will revisit. Marlowe's hands opened and closed in his lap. Colonel, it is not punishment, Hitch said. It is control. Protocol demands we know whether your order belongs to a bottle or to your men. Whitaker set the empty glass down with a careful click. 1 Sunday, he said. We'll be ready. Hitch signed a single page with a square blocky name and tore it free. Post this by noon. He paused at the door. And warden men can be counted. Ideas should be too. Whitaker looked at the pool of light thinning on the blotter. He looked at the window where the yard waited without knowing what would be taken from it. He did not argue. Outside, the chapel bell offered a low note and faded. Inside, the clock remembered itself and ticked once. The bottle on the desk kept being empty, and the son kept finding it anyway. By nightfall, the paper was tacked to the bulletin board, Sunday distribution suspended pending review. The guards read it with set jaws. The prisoners read it with straight backs. The rumor ran the fence like a wire of its own and hummed there bright with heat. Snow came soft as breath over the wire, sugaring the yard and quieting even the boots. December sharpened the air until every sound felt etched, the creak of the gate, the small cough of a guard, the chapel hymn tuning itself in the cold. Inside the admin hut, the V-mail counter glowed under a lamp. A line of prisoners waited with folded slips in hand while Chaplain Marlowe translated small lives into smaller sentences. "Tell her the baby learns to stand." He read, pencil steady. "We'll fit that in." Klaus Weber nodded, and, "I learn an American word, thank you." Marlowe smiled. "That one travels light." Behind them, the screen door popped and shut. Whitaker stepped in, knocking snow from his cap. "Short lines tonight. Fingers will freeze on the stamps." The clerk raised the rubber stamp anyway. Thud, card, thud, card. The sound had become the camp's winter heartbeat. Outside townspeople began gathering along the fence hats, pulled low scarves wound like promises. Someone set down a basket of hymnals. Someone else cleared a throat. The chapel door opened and warm light spilled out, carrying pine and wax and a cord still searching for itself. A boy in a red cap peered through the mesh. "Are they the ones who sing 'Stille Nacht'?" "Same melody," his mother said, touching his shoulder. "Different mouth." Sergeant Morrison jogged past with a crate on his shoulder. Glass clinking softly. "Lanterns," he called to Whitaker. "If the colonel asks, we call it safety." Whitaker followed him to the platform. The men had washed and saved the bottles all autumn. Now Morrison slid candles into their throats and set them along the fence, green glass cupping small steady flames. The snow multiplied the light. Frost formed a lace on the shoulders of each bottle and made halos where heat met cold. Colonel Hitch had left a week ago with his review. The paper still hung, Sunday distribution suspended pending review. The yard had a faintly held breath about it, like a verse waiting for the next line. Sir Morrison said quietly, "They'll sing whether we do or don't." "We will?" Whitaker answered, looking down the fence. "And they will." Jensen reached the fence with his daughters, the little one holding a brown paper sack. "We brought peppermint," he told the guard. "If it's allowed." "It's not food," the guard said, then shrugged. "It's Christmas." Jensen nodded toward Whitaker. "You could still end this ritual, Earl." "Or begin it again," Whitaker said. "Charity isn't policy," Jensen said, gentle but firm. "Neither is bitterness," Whitaker replied. The chapel piano gave out the first notes, and the townspeople found the shape of "O Come All Ye Faithful." Voices rose white breath, making ghostly bells in the cold. Weber stood behind the line and mouthed the English he knew, dropping softly to German when he didn't. A few prisoners hummed harmony, a few closed their eyes like men drinking water. Marlowe lifted a hand. "Answer them," he said to the prisoners. "Use your own words." Weber stepped forward without quite meaning to. "Stille Nacht, heilige Nacht." The others joined low and round the fence, no longer dividing sound. Jensen's older girl started to cry, just a little, the way a heart makes room for something it didn't know it could hold. The bottles along the fence went on burning. Whitaker moved a step back from the light and watched frost thicken, then melt, then thicken again as the candles breathed. He felt the old worry stir softness optics letters home, and then felt it settle. If order had a lantern, this was it. Colonel Hitch's car appeared like a dark comma at the road's edge. He stood for a moment under the chapel gable listening. No clipboard tonight. Only his hat and a silence he didn't interrupt. When the hymn finished, he approached Whitaker. "Warden," he said. "Colonel." Hitch glanced at the bottles. "Those are lanterns." "They are," Whitaker said. "And the Sunday question. You brought the answer?" Hitch took a folded paper from his coat and did not hand it over yet. "You said data would hold." He nodded at the yard where men returned their candles to the crate as carefully as if they were borrowed stars. "It holds." He passed the document. Ritual resumed Sundays, only effective immediately. No speech, no concession, just a seal. Morrison exhaled a winter laugh. The choir did more than my clipboard ever could. Some audits belong to ears, Marlowe said. Jensen leaned close to the wire. If it keeps them decent, I'll sing every week, he said, and handed the peppermint to the guard to pass along. The little girl waved through the mesh. Weber waved back, startled by his own hand. Another verse, someone called. Hark the herald. The pianist answered, and the song leapt like a fire catching dry kindling. English rode the top, German braided beneath. The fence did not move. The music did. Whitaker stood alone for a moment, letting the bottle lantern glow paint his coat. Snow ticked against the glass and then melted. He thought of the stamp's thud of Sunday lines without shouting of a ledger that had become a kind of carol in numbers. Morrison trotted up with a fresh crate. "Sir, I'll make sure the empty bottles are counted. We'll need them next week." "Count the light, too," Whitaker said. "Hard to put that on a form." "Try," Whitaker said, and smiled. A runner from administration came across the yard at a respectful pace, breath pluming. He handed Whitaker a telegram with mittened fingers. The paper crackled. Whitaker read slowly, then looked out at the singing fence, the families, the prisoners, the candles that refused to gutter. "News?" Marlowe asked. Whitaker folded the sheet once. He let the silence speak before words did. "Repatriation orders," he said. "They've begun to move the trains." The morning the first train pulled out, Frost wrote its quiet script across the platform. Men shook hands through the wire, not long, not dramatic, just the kind that finishes a job with dignity. Guards checked names, folded blankets, closed crates. In the library hut, a single bottle rested in a small glass case beside a typed card. The hum of an old radio in the corner carried an archival hiss, as if the air itself were remembering. Whitaker stood by the case cap tucked beneath his arm. He read the caption one more time. Campalona, 1944-46. Weekly Sunday ritual. 1 bottle, 1 rule. No exceptions. Return to the crate when finished. The glass caught a square of winter light and threw a thin green ribbon across the shelves. He let it pass over his sleeve, then away. Outside, a guard called names. Weber, Klaus. Weber stepped forward in a coat too large for him, ticket pinned to the lapel. He glanced toward the library door, then toward Whitaker. They met halfway, no ceremony, only the room a man makes by stopping. Sir Weber said, careful with the word. "They told me there is a bottle you keep." "There is," Whitaker said. He opened the door so Weber could see it without crossing the threshold. "We used it for a light last Christmas." Weber smiled. "I carry the light," he said, tapping his chest. "But it helps to see it again." "Safe journey," Whitaker said. "Write if the mail finds you." Weber nodded. "I will write. I will say we returned what was given." He hesitated, then offered his hand. "Thank you for the rules." Whitaker shook once, brief and firm. "Thank you for keeping them." The whistle called. The platform answered with a shuffle and a hush. The crate lids closed wood on wood, patient as lids on hymnals. The radio in the library faded to a thin line of static and then settled. Snow waited at the window, undecided. The letters started that spring brown envelopes with foreign stamps, cramped ink leaning forward like men on a slope. "We are rebuilding the shop," Weber wrote. "My daughter learned the word Sunday. When we queue, I remember how the bottles came in order and left in order. My mother laughed when I told her about the taste. Then she cried because I had tasted anything sweet at all." Jensen sent a parcel the following winter, coffee socks, peppermint sticks, and a note scrawled across the customs form, "Plant in spring. Be decent in winter." Years stepped down the hall. The camp emptied, then closed, then vanished into county records that slept more than they woke. The library case made its way to a small room in town, and from there, decades later, to a museum with photographs in clean frames and plaques that didn't brag. Whitaker retired before any of that. Still, he visited on a quiet weekday to see where the bottle had come to rest. A docent nodded him toward an exhibit labeled Homefront Custody Work Rules Rituals. Behind the glass stood the same green bottle, its label sun-faded, its throat nicked where a candle had once lived, its shadow still a graceful bruise on the backing. Beside it lay a carbon copy of a ledger page, head counts, infractions, sick call entries, all the music of order written in numbers instead of notes. Jensen came up beside him, older now, the farm on his coat sleeves. A smile pressed into the corners of his eyes. "You kept it," he said. "We all did," Whitaker answered. Turns out charity can be policy, Jensen said. Turns out kindness is easier to keep when you count it, Whitaker replied. From a small speaker above the case, a recording flickered to life, brittle and warm, a choir, 2 languages braided, singing still a knocked, as if the fence had never learned to divide sound. The radio hiss under it made the decades feel like a dress rehearsal for this 1 minute. They stood without speaking. Visitors moved on to tanks and timelines. The bottle stayed the size of one choice and looked big enough to hold a winter sky. Back outside, Whitaker buttoned his coat against a plain wind and watched the town he knew continue its ordinary work. He thought of a stamp's thud of Sunday lines of men learning not to run when they didn't have to. He thought of trains pulling east and the letters that followed like birds that knew their way. He tipped his cap to no one and everyone and said the line he'd saved for the end just loud enough for the day to hear. Because mercy kept the gates. Snow dusts the Iowa Library steps as he pauses by the glass case, where the green bottle and a V-mail stamp sit under calm museum light. The radio's archival hiss threads the room, while the camp's old ledger, their quiet radar, still makes forgotten days visible. He thinks of cloud shadows that once smudged names into memory fog, and how nothing truly vanished when men returned what was given one Sunday at a time. A canteen cup could catch choir light, but it was the rule that taught the hand to be steady. Families pass reading, the card ritual resumed, bottles returned, choir answered through the wire. The case holds the proof and the town holds the echo. Some choices outlive their paperwork, because mercy kept the gates.